Welcome to the Lockdown Lectures, where we are learning about the lives of some of Manchester's amazing researchers. Today we're joined by Michael Wood, Professor in Public History at the University of Manchester. For almost 40 years, Michael has brought history alive for viewers and readers in Britain, the US and worldwide. He's the author of several best-selling books on English history, as well as over 120 documentary films, including The Story of India, described by the Wall Street Journal as the gold standard of history documentary making. Of his recent Story of China series on BBC Two, the state news agency in China, Xinhua, said it had transcended the barriers of ethnicity and belief and brought something inexplicably powerful and touching to the TV audience. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Megan. Nice to be here.
So firstly, how are you coping with the lockdown? Has there been any compulsive reading or viewing or anything in particular that's got you through?
Well, strangely enough, it's been really enjoyable in some ways. I've missed all the obvious things like, going to the theatre, going to the cinema, and you realise what privileges they are to be able to have those things at your fingertips. And I've missed my friends. I'm playing in a band in Manchester and I'm down in London, so that I really miss. I keep getting forlorn little snippets of music through on my computer. So, but I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of work on my big China book, which is coming out in the autumn. That's been a massive job, really, in terms of the proofs and the pictures. And in terms of binge watching, I suppose, like most people, we watch Normal People, for example, which I hadn't seen when it first went out, which I loved. I'm not a particular fan of Sally Rooney, to be honest, but their films were just fabulous. And my secret wicked pleasure is I'm watching Mad Men, which I'm now up to nearly the end of the third series, and that's really, really great. So, I mean, the funny thing is, I don't know whether we waste a lot of time in our normal lives going to the office and stuff like that, but being at home focuses the mind.
I agree. So in terms of your research, what was the spark that inspired you to pursue that area of research, and did you face any challenges along the way?
Well, just talking in general about history, I mean, my big love has always been history, right since I was a little kid. And I suppose being a kind of 1950s child, history was all around you then, because the generation of your parents had gone through the war, and my dad had been on the medical side at D-Day and into the Far East, and his brother had been torpedoed and sunk in the Mediterranean, and my Uncle Bill had done Dunkirk and D-Day and the march to Berlin. So as a little kid growing up, you hear all these stories, and the past becomes an object of incredible, fascination. So right from my childhood, I loved history, I suppose you'd have to say. And especially those periods where we don't know enough, where you've got to engage with the sources in a really close way, and where you have to use your imagination, what a friend of mine calls sympathetic imagination, to bring the lives of the past to life. So I think my big thing was always history, and I studied history at A levels in university. And I was brought up in Manchester, and we moved out from Moss Side to Wythenshawe, and my parents lived in Wythenshawe for 35 years. And I suppose if you'd said to me what my ambition was when I left university, I probably would have expected to be a history teacher at the local grammar school in Wythenshawe, which was Poundswick in those days. I don't know what it is now with the reorganisation. So that's what I thought I would do. But chance leads you in all sorts of strange directions, doesn't it?
And over on Twitter, Joe Stafford would like to know, what period of history do you wish you could travel back in time to experience, and why?
Okay, this is, for any historian, this is a really, really difficult question. There's so many periods in history where you'd give anything to be able to go back. And my big love in history has been the Anglo-Saxon period, before the Norman Conquest. And I still write about it. But I think if you gave me one night to go back to another world, it would be late Elizabethan London, the late 1590s, when Shakespeare was writing the Henry IV plays, and that was a world on the cusp of change, and incredibly dynamic. And London was rising to become a world city. It was full of people from all over. You know, you could even meet African people and Bengali people in those days. You know, and Shakespeare even put African people into his plays. So I think if I could have one night in another time, it would be 1597 London.
And Laura Dawson has asked, can history offer us any advice on how to deal with COVID-19?
Well, you know, not in an obvious way, but history is, you know, human feelings and humanity are a very important part of looking at history. Terrible things have happened in history, and our great models are always the people who did their best against sometimes tide of injustice and violence and everything else. It's still the case, isn't it? And what strikes me is when I look as a medievalist at the Black Death, you know, the Black Death hit England in 1348 and through to about 1351. It was catastrophe in the British Isles. You know, between a half and 2/3 of people died. It was far more horrendous than what we're going through now. And when you look at what people went through then, it's very salutary to see how they responded. I did a series of films not that long ago about a single village in Leicestershire. It's called The Story of England, and it's actually on at the moment, being repeated on the BBC. And it's got among the best records for any place in our early history. And it had the worst losses of any village that we know of in the Black Death. About 2/3 of the village died. And what's very interesting to look at the detail close up. You know, you're not generalizing it, you're actually looking at the individual villagers and their families, and you see the losses they go through. You know, the new village scribe having to record the death of his own parents and that sort of stuff. And in the aftermath, what you see is the importance of human solidarity, looking after each other, caring about the education of kids. It's very, very interesting, this. You know, you think about the debate we're going through about schools today. In the immediate aftermath of the Black Death, several groups of farmers gave a bit of land or property or a building to provide the rental for income to make charities, guilds and charities. And these charities would be looking after the poor. They'd be talking about the disposal of the dead, paying for a priest to do prayers, but also for the education of the next generation, you know. And I think what that reaction shows is that human solidarity and fellow feeling is the single most important thing in all this, taking care of each other. And that lesson from the Black Death has always struck me very powerfully, I think.
Dan White asks, who is your favourite character from history?
Oh, God, blimey, that's a difficult one. You know, I've made films about a lot of great characters in history. Alexander the Great, what an awful person he must have been. Really great people in our history. Alfred the Great, for instance, who I think is the greatest Briton without a shadow of doubt. But my favourite character, and it's really obvious, I suppose, because I've spent a lot of time writing and filming about him, is Shakespeare. I did a 4-part biography of Shakespeare for the BBC, and I've written a big biography of Shakespeare. And I should say, probably since my school days in Manchester, since I was 11, Shakespeare has been an obsessive interest of mine. He's just the most interesting person in history for me. How did somebody from a poor farming background, you know, both his parents were just ordinary 100-acre farming families. How did he become who he was? And over the years, I've done films about him. I did a film about his mother. You know, I feel as if I know him to a point. At least I know about his material life, his parents and his grandparents and his friends and his neighbours and his colleagues and the people he worked with. But I'd love a night in the Blue Boar Inn in Cheapside over a beer to ask him the questions we'd all really like to know. Although I think he was probably somebody who kept his cards very close to his chest. So whether you'd really get out of him the things you'd really like to know. I don't know.
I think that's a really good choice. And again on Twitter, Rosalind Arnold says, Chinese history is taught at universities in the UK, but rarely at schools. What are UK children missing out on?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, history has to be limited on the school curriculum, because you've got what are, on the face of it, for young people, more important things, the English language, and mathematics and science and stuff like that. So you're only ever going to be limited on the school curriculum for the amount of history you can do. So you're only ever likely to study Chinese history in detail once you're in the upper school or uni. But I'm biased, I know, because I've just written a gigantic book on Chinese history. But it is the most fabulous history, I almost say, of any culture on earth, really. It's so incredibly rich, so various, so creative, so human, so dramatic. The stories are great, the characters are great, and it's of very great importance to our world too. So there's no doubt at all that it is really worth studying and thinking about. I mean, we did a series of films called The Story of China that was on about 3 years ago on the BBC, and we got a huge response from people. I don't think I've ever been stopped so many times on the London Tube or on a bus, people going, I had no idea, It's really great, and I think we all do need to understand China a little bit better. There's so many prejudices flying around about China at the moment.
And obviously we're all away from campus at the moment, Michael. So what do you miss the most about the University of Manchester at the moment?
Yeah, in particular, I do, and Rebecca, my partner, does it with me, and David Olashoga's involved in it now. We do this MA in History and Film, and we've been doing it for a few years, and it's really, really great fun. The students make, they plan a film, they sketch it, they pitch it, they research it, they shoot it, they edit it, and then we show it. And it goes into the archive at Manchester Museum now. In the last 3 years, we've narrowed it down, so the focus of the stories is all about identity, immigration, tends to be Manchester-based, migration, community identity. And some of these films are fantastic. They're only 10-minute films, but you could make whole films for TV about many of them. And that process is really terrific. We usually start in about January with a meeting around a big table in a committee room in the university, and each of the student groups pitches their film. And sometimes we say, oh, come on, you're not going to make a film about that. And sometimes we go, that's a brilliant idea. So that and the whole process of it is such fun. And this year, of course, the students can't make the film. They can't go out because of social distancing. They can't interview the subjects of the films that they've planned to make. So everything has to be done on paper and imagined on paper, and the plotting of the film, the lot, and they'll be judged on that. So in terms of the very particular, that's apart from my friends in the university and the contacts in the university, and that course is such great fun, and I live in London now, although I'm a Mancunian and have spent half my life in Manchester. So my regular trips up have stopped. So I'm kind of, I miss that as well. I really enjoy getting the train on a Monday morning over the Stockport Viaduct, coming into Manchester, going to the uni, seeing friends, and so on. So many things about it. The university is a very creative and dynamic place, We've got all sorts of Chinese events going on, as you know, photographic competitions that we started last year, with Anglo-Chinese photographic competitions where people in both countries are making films about friendship and contact and stuff like that. So many things, but we're trying to keep as much going as possible.
And Michael, looking back on your career, what advice would you have given to yourself at the start of this career?
Well, certainly wish I'd been wiser, but I think the big advice I would give is to always don't forget your passions, the passions that drove you when you were young. because that's a very true feeling to have passions about things when you're young. And you should always nurture those, because you never know where things are going to go in life. And also, you never know whether those passions might be the key to the path that you take in life, even when you didn't expect it. And so I do think following your passions, I think being patient is a very important thing. Very important. You sometimes have to wait for your opportunity. Rebecca and I are part of a small film company. We get a lot of letters from young people who've left university and they want to be involved in film. And there's a limit to the advice you can give to people. But being patient is one of them. And also learning the technical things of whatever it is that you want to do. A friend of mine's dad used to say, "You've got to learn the grammar." Now, he was a musician, and what he meant was that side of it, but it goes for anything, whether it's Latin or whether it's filmmaking. Make sure that you've got that expertise, I think. But follow your passions and be patient.
And finally, what advice would you have given to yourself at the start of the lockdown?
Right, okay. I remember that first week where our local supermarket, everybody was panicking and clearing the shelves of loo roll, and it just underlines how stupid people can be, in terms of beginning of a lockdown. I think being patient is still a thing, and using the time well, I think. Use the time well. It's very difficult. I know a lot of people are suffering, and a lot of people they're terrible tragedies. We've got friends of ours who have been really, really seriously ill with it. And the lockdown is no fun for a lot of people. Very, very tough, especially if they're on their own and are feeling it. But if you can use the time well and make the most of it, and be positive, that's great. And cut yourself some slack as well, I think, don't beat yourself up if we've all got to be patient under this.
Thank you to everybody that submitted a question, and Michael, thank you for taking the time to answer them. I'll now pass over to you for your lockdown lecture.